Another bias is framing bias. And the framing bias means that when we go to make a decision or solve a problem or make a diagnosis or make a treatment decision, we tend to see it through a certain frame. We have our training, our background, our theories that we use about mental illness, and we see that through the frame. And, for example, I'm standing right here, and if I look out that window, this is the best window I've ever been able to use this example for, ever. But if I look over here, I see certain things on that wall. And you looking over here, you see other things looking through that wall. And that's kind of how framing works. And so often when you get people together and they have different frames, sometimes you don't see things eye to eye, but that actually can be great for decision making because you're covering more area. So how do we get these frames? Where do these frames come from? They come from two different places. One is the way a problem is framed for you. So that letter from a GP says, can you evaluate this patient to see if they are depressed? That has put a frame on the problem, right? And a lot of times, salespeople use this all the time, right? And your real estate agents or whatever. If it's a crummy house in a great neighborhood, it's going to be all about lifestyle and, the neighborhood and everything else, right? So sometimes it's used in sales. But most of the time, I used to teach marketing research to students when I was at Northwestern University in the US. And we did lots of statistics and difficult stuff. But the hardest thing for them was when they had to write objective, down the middle questions for a survey that they had to create. That is really hard. It's really hard to ask a question that doesn't frame things in a certain way or lead someone in one direction to the other. So pretty much any time a problem gets presented to you, there's some frame on it. And it doesn't mean anyone was trying to manipulate you. It could easily just be that that's how it was put to you. Okay, so that's one way we get framing. The other way we get framing is our past experience, our culture, our business functions. These all give us our frames that we use to make judgments. And I was saying, theories. When I was in graduate school, in my PhD training for social psychology, I was with a lot of the clinical students, but before that I got a master's degree in counseling psychology. And I was in cognitive behavioral therapy then, but also did some training and sitting behind the mirror and so forth with some of the Freudian professors and the different sorts of professors. And these were clearly frames. I mean, what they were seeing, what we were being taught, how what the patient said was interpreted back to us was completely based on the theoretical frame. And you could take the same statement by the same patient and it would be viewed completely differently based on the theoretical model that the instructor was coming from. Where I've seen this big in my life is my daughter's grandparents are not my husband's or my parents. So you're thinking, how did that happen? She's adopted. She's adopted from Thailand, and she's 16 now, but we met her when she was 4, a week after the tsunami in Thailand. We were teaching business school students at Singapore. One of our students had survived, been evacuated back to Singapore, was desperate to go back to Thailand to help. He and a couple classmates and my husband and I went. There we are on the ground in Thailand, day 7 after the tsunami. And if I tell you the whole story in this much detail, we'll be here till tomorrow. So I'm going to speed up. While we're handing stuff out in a camp, somebody walks up with the cutest 4-year-old you've ever seen and says, "No mama, no papa." And that's my little girl. And so we thought she was cute, so we took her home. No, that's not how it happened. There's a whole book in how we came to be her parents, and I assure you it was all completely legal and kosher. We go back and visit Grandma and Grandpa all the time. And in the first year we had her at home with us in Singapore, we went every month for a weekend every month to help ease the transition. And also because the grandparents gave us this tremendous gift and we didn't want them to miss her too much. So, we went back and we visited a lot. And we have completely different frames, right? This village used to be a tin mining town. The police didn't even go in there until the 90s. I mean, it was a rough place. They have a few years of education between them, the grandparents. They're not dumb, but they don't have much education between them, right? And we live in cities where academics, we have PhDs, and so our frames are really, really different. But we have this thing in common, which is we all love this wonderful little girl, right? And we got along amazingly. They're like an extra set of in-laws. We're family. They're great. But the one area where we had real trouble was because we had we always had different frames, but in this case it really mattered. And it had to do with the motorcycle, right? Grandma and Grandpa would think nothing of throwing the little kid onto the back of the motorcycle, zipping off, because that's what they do. When you live in a poor country and you're pretty poor, you have to get from A to B in a motorcycle. And people do that with their kids and their babies and everything all the time. It scared the crap out of us. When I was growing up, my parents were pretty laid back about boys and drugs, but don't ever get on a motorcycle, right? Don't ever get. They weren't encouraging drugs, but it was the motorcycle that we heard over and over again, right? So this idea, we're new parents, right? We go visit the grandparents, and they're throwing her on the back of the motorcycle, and they want some autonomy when they're there. They want to take her around to see their friends, and they don't want us to always, they love us, but they're like, go to the hotel and relax, and they want to zip around. It's like, we can't relax because we're thinking about the head injuries. And so, so we're looking at it from these completely different frames. And one of the frame that we're using, my husband and I, is as academics. So we're thinking about motorcycle road fatality statistics in Thailand, right? And then seriously in our head, we're trying to do the math of so we go one weekend a month. She's probably on the motorcycle 20 minutes because they're short little rides. She's probably only near dangerous traffic, maybe 6 of those minutes. What really is the probability, and trying to figure out should we be okay with this, right? And the grandparents have a very different frame. They're Buddhists, they're Southern Thai Buddhists, and it is about, are you wearing the right strings and do you have the right medallion on? Because that's what keeps you safe. Grandma put this on me. Grandma somehow made herself just honorary monk. But people come to her house and they get their strings. So, and Grandma says, when you're on an airplane, please, put the medallion around her neck because those airplanes are so dangerous, right? And, so what do you do? How do you solve a conflict like this? Well, I didn't think about it this way at the time, but looking back, I do. You have to find the overlap in the frame because frames can be the source of conflict. How is it that you can have two, in any sort of conflict, you can have two wonderful, caring, concerned people who have a completely different sense of what's right in a situation? It's because we're looking through different frames, right? And so how do you resolve that conflict? You try and look for overlap in the frame. And so we came to Grandma's house. We had a translator. Now my daughter can translate, but we had a translator with us. And I just said to Grandma, I said, I know we're silly foreigners. I know that we worry about things that people like us have the luxury to worry about. I know it's silly. But I cry before we come here because I think about what it would be like if she were in a motorcycle accident or if we lost her. It just hurts so much. And we can't go relax because we're just thinking about that. And so Grandma was like, yeah, you are being silly, but I don't want you to be sad. And so boom, there the frames now overlap. How can we care about each other and care about each other's feelings, whether we agree with them or not, and come to a solution? And so from then on, Grandma always texted us when she wanted us, or actually she just called us. We know a few words of Thai, and we would come pick them up and take them places. And we eventually got them their own car, so that when we came and visited, she would be inside a car. So, but that's an example of how you can have frames. It can lead to conflict. And I think these can lead to professional conflicts too. I would imagine that I'm seeing heads nodding. So let me ask you, where do you see this happening in your professional work, sort of framing, causing issues? Right. Were you able to hear that over there? Yeah, so basically when people are making diagnoses or trying to understand when a patient behaves in a certain way, are they just acting out, or is it actually a symptom that maybe they have less control over, or that those are the different frames. And why might people have different opinions about that? What's the actual frame that has them coming at it from different directions? Is it a theoretical basis? Is it experience? What do you think it is that?
I think it's a mixture of things. Experience.
So experience can make a big difference. Yeah. What people have been doing in their training and in their practice. Yeah. Others. Yeah. If you could just speak up so the other side hears as well.
I work as a psychologist, but I actually work with psychiatrists.
Yes.
And often what happens is I might actually talk to the patient kind of like on a different kind of level, because they're coming in weekly and we're opening up their whole lives in front of me and we're talking about the depths of their soul stuff.
Yes.
So I might actually have a different frame around what I see the actual problem is compared to say what the psychiatrist would.
Yes.
They might look at it from, say, a medical model or a particular diagnostic frame. Whereas I'm seeing it maybe a slightly different angle. The personal life, the emotions, the mind, body, spirit stuff. And we might be at odds with each other.
Right.
We might be at odds with each other, but generally we try to we communicate. So therefore the two frames usually end up overlapping somewhat. Yeah. And that's a good thing as well.
But that's what you do. You just try and find that overlap.
The middle ground.
So in case you missed the beginning, it's the psychiatrist-psychologist difference. Psychologist working with the patient, spending a lot of time with the patient, the psychiatrist coming in, maybe looking at that patient from very, very different angles. Anyone over on this side of the room? We have a microphone now, so where you see framing happening. Yeah.
I work as a psychiatrist, so I guess where we see it mostly, I work in a private hospital, is different psychiatrists' personality type. For instance, a chap in the room next to me is a bit of an alpha. Mm-hmm. He describes himself as an alpha male anyway. Okay. So his frame on how patients present can sometimes be quite different to mine, and therefore the interpretation of what the treatment should be can be quite different.
Yeah, that's right. So our personalities can have an impact on how we frame things, how much sympathy we have for different things, how we recognize things. Good, yeah, so we have a lot of different framings. And what can we do about these framing biases? I'm not going to go through all of these, and I'm sure that you can get copies of the slides, right? They'll be, great. But these are questions you can ask yourself. What issues, my frame, what does it tend to address most? What yardsticks or reference points do I use? I like this one, the metaphor. When we use metaphors, which I think often have in treating mental illness, that's kind of a metaphor-rich area. Do our metaphors create frames? If you're leading a team of people and you think about them as a family, or you think about them as a sports team, that has very different implications when someone can't perform. Right? So the metaphors we use can end up being frames. And then the other thing is when a problem is framed for you, so when someone is referred to you, how is the wording of the problem created? Or someone in your organization comes to you and says, there's this problem. And just before you even start thinking about the answer or the solution, just take a few seconds to think about the question and ask yourself, has the wording of this created a frame? What is it overlooking? So when someone says, should we do this or this, there's always a bigger frame. Is there a third option? Should we do neither? Should we do both? Right? So there's always options outside a frame. And is there an alternative question that can lead to a broader frame? Is there something, a wider question that we can ask? So these are all remedies and things that you can apply to try and get over the framing bias. The other thing you can do is try and falsify your frame. This is a neurological problem. This is not a neurological problem. I remember when my daughter was in kindergarten and first grade, she had a classmate, this little girl who just cried all the time. You'd come into school because your kid forgot something and you're dropping it off in the classroom or there's some event. That kid was crying all the time. And my friend had her over and she cried 4 times. And I looked at this kid and, you know, from my background and what I had been reading lately and so forth, so I'm thinking, this kid is depressed. This kid is seriously depressed. And if it were my kid, I would be thinking actually about some medication for this. It wouldn't be my first step. I'd go and get help and go to the experts and things like that. But if an expert told me, yes, an antidepressant would be helpful, I would go for it because she's so young and so sad all the time. And I remember we were at a birthday party and I was talking to another mom about it. And I sort of started to say what I thought. She goes, oh, no. She said, do you see how much attention that child gets every time she cries? She's on the teacher's lap. Her mother gets to come into school and she gets cuddles from her mother. The other kids in the class help her. Do you see what this child is getting out of this behavior? Now, I still don't know which one of us was right, but it was just striking that 2 people looking at this child's behavior were seeing completely different things. And as a psychologist, I should have noticed the social aspects of what was going on around her, but I got fixated on the potential biological aspects of what was happening with this child. So it's often good to just, if you know that you see things in a certain way, you know, if you're more of a psychodynamic person, you could ask yourself, how would I think about this if I did CBT? And if you're a CBT person, how would I think about this if I was doing psychodynamic? And, you know, what's lovely about how things have changed is how much people are doing all of these things. Most of you have a menu of options and you apply what you think is relevant for a particular patient. But it certainly didn't used to be that way. And those of you who are more my age can probably remember times where you got trained in X and the other people were stupid. And, you know, this is just what you did and that's all that you did. Yeah. And the other thing is to talk to someone with a different frame. So we tend to ask other people's opinions who kind of share a brain with us, who are similar, who are going to tell us what we want to hear. To really burst through frames, we need to talk to someone with a different frame, get out to someone with a different specialty area or a different theoretical perspective, someone you tend to disagree with. I mean, a big part of what Psych Scene is about is getting people with completely different frames. You know, immunologists, hematologists, and psychiatrists working together to solve a problem of what's going on with the patient, right? And none of those alone with their own frame would have been able to do it. So, you know, and that person at work who drives you nuts because you always disagree with them, that's actually sometimes the best person to ask because they'll get further from your frame than the buddy that you tend to hang out with. And also we tend to say, hey, you know, I'm thinking this, what do you think? And then our friend says, yeah, that's good, right? That's not challenging our frame. You need to ask more, before you say what you think, how do you see this situation? And once you say what you think, is there something I'm missing here? You have to truly invite that opinion to come in and challenge your opinion.